Good afternoon. So what I want to talk about this afternoon is I really want to walk you through the evolution of talent acquisition at Waste Management, and specifically how we were able to optimize performance with our internal waste management recruiting team as well as the performance of the RPO. So before we actually get into our discussion, and there's quite a bit of information that I want to cover with you, so we may not have time for questions, but I promise I will be around. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to tap me on the shoulder. How many of you watched the Phoenix Open? Okay, so we have a couple of golf enthusiasts in the room. Okay, so Waste Management sponsors the Phoenix Open every year, and so before we get into our conversation, I just wanted to share with you a couple of the commercials that we aired at this year's Phoenix Open.
What a can, what a can, what a can, what a mighty good can.
I'm a mighty, mighty good can.
What a can, what a can, what a can, what a mighty good can.
Mighty good can.
Nailed it.
Hey, you gonna eat that?
More like potassium. Am I right? Am I right?
That's a good one.
It's brown, but it tastes yellow.
We have been out here all day. When are they gonna let us in?
We're on the list, right? We gotta be on the list, right?
Hang on, was that Neil? They let Neil in?
The Waste Management Phoenix Open is a zero waste event. No trash cans invited.
Oh, wow, this is gonna be so... I am so sorry.
Happens to everyone.
So, a trash can, a recycle bin, and a dumpster walk into a...
Those things can't walk.
Okay, a trash can says to a recycle bin...
Yeah, they can't talk.
Okay, yeah, but we're talking...
Nope, no talking. You're a terrible storyteller.
So how about that party last night?
Woo, it was fun, but that's a lot of trash. I just don't know if I can do it.
Come on, are you a trash can or a trash can't?
I'm a trash can.
You're a what?
I'm a trash can.
Say it proud.
Can.
So Waste Management, we were actually founded in 1968 and we went public in 1971. We've got 43,000 employees and we operate in 47 states to include the District of Columbia, Canada, and now we have operations in Indore. And so we are a pretty well-established organization. Now when you look at our talent acquisition function, we make about 10,000 hires per year. And our team is comprised of about 80 talent acquisition professionals. And that mix is comprised of recruiters, our talent shared services group, and our leadership team. And part of the leadership team is a new addition to the talent acquisition function, which is our internal sourcing team. And so for an organization that has been around as long as talent acquisition has been around, as long as Waste Management has been around, our talent acquisition function is not as established. So I've been with the company now 10 years, and I wasn't always part of talent acquisition. I was on the generalist side as a HR business partner. But I had the opportunity to watch talent acquisition from the periphery, and there were just a ton of challenges and let's call it low-hanging fruit. And so when I got the call to lead the talent acquisition function, I was excited about what I could get accomplished, or perhaps maybe I'm just a glutton for punishment. But in any event, when I first joined the company, Waste Management was comprised of 50 different regions. And so within those 50 different regions, you had 50 different ways of doing recruiting. So every region had their own recruiter. They had at least one recruiter, but there were hundreds of recruiters that existed at Waste Management. So as you can imagine, there were lots of challenges when it came to compliance. Some recruiters in some areas were more effective in their recruiting strategies than others because some areas were more resourced than others were. Some recruiters had better relationships with their business partners than others did. And so it was an incredibly inefficient function. So around about 2012 is when they decided to centralize the talent acquisition function. And I joined talent acquisition at the end of 2012 and was tapped on the shoulder to lead talent acquisition mid-2013. So this was sort of state of the union when I joined the organization, when I joined talent in 2012. We had a blended RPO, non-RPO structure. So our frontline operations, our high volume, fast-paced positions were supported by the RPO. Our exempt administrative positions were non-RPO supported. So that split looks like 6,500 are RPO supported, and the balance of that average of 10,000 hires were non-RPO. And that RPO relationship had been in place for over a decade, but there were no standards of expectation. There were no service level agreements. The recruiters themselves had no performance metrics. And so I would constantly hear that the business was displeased with what they were getting or not getting from talent acquisition, but we hadn't really defined what good looks like. So there were a lot of challenges there. Our structure was such that it was geographically aligned. So each area had their own recruiter, but that recruiter was responsible for recruiting for every function that could possibly have an opportunity. So you would be recruiting for drivers and technicians, which are high volume, fast-paced recruiting roles. And then you would also have recruiters in that same geography looking for some of the more complex roles like environmental engineers, financial analysts, and the like. And so they were spread incredibly thin. They had their hands in so many different pots. They didn't have an opportunity to really become subject matter experts. There was a very flat talent team structure as well, so there were no real opportunities for our high-performing, high-potential recruiters to advance or to have stretch assignments. Either you were a recruiter or you were a director, and there were really no opportunities in between. So again, there were a ton of challenges that I was facing when I took on this role. So here are some of the things that we did to begin to remedy those challenges. When we look at the RPO side of the business, the first thing that we clearly needed to do was establish service level agreements. So what does good look like? What is our organizational strategy? And RPO partner, how can we ensure that your strategy aligns with our strategy? First thing we did was within those service level agreements, we looked at many components, but there were three that were really going to drive the performance of the RPO. The first was time to present. How long was it taking for the RPO partner to present qualified candidates to the business? Before we started measuring this, it could be anywhere from 5 days to 50 days, okay? And so we really needed to narrow that in significantly. So our target became 5 days. You've got 5 days to present a minimum of 5 qualified candidates to the hiring manager for consideration. The second metric that we looked at was interview to hire ratio. So how many candidates does a hiring manager have to interview before they feel like they can make a hiring decision? Before we started measuring that, they were interviewing in excess of 25 candidates for very low-skilled frontline positions before they were able to make a hire, which to me says that there was a huge disconnect. If I'm sending you 20 candidates, that means that I clearly don't understand what it is you're looking for in terms of knowledge, skill, and experience. And so we set this target at 5. So the interview to offer ratio should be 5. Within the 5 candidates that I send you for consideration, you should be able to make a hire out of one of those. If for some reason we get to 5 and you still don't feel like you can make an offer to a candidate, then we need to stop the process. We need to come back to the table, recalibrate, talk about where we're missing the mark so that we can revise our search. But our target is 5 to 1. And time to offer and time to fill, which was a huge one for us, because we had never measured time to offer, time to fill. The business just knew that the hiring process was taking too long, but nobody really had a good sense of how long it should really take. The other challenge that came into play with this is there are components of the offer process, as you well know, that are within the recruiter's control, and then there are components of it that are not within the recruiter's control. And so we struggled a bit on what should the recruiter's performance be measured on. Should it be measured on time to offer or time to fill? So out of the gate, we said, okay, it's going to be time to offer because they can control that. So time to offer was everything from the point at which the requisition was approved to the point at which the offer was extended. And everyone felt good about that. However, the business pushed back on that a bit and said, when we extend an offer to a candidate, still doesn't help me because I'm not able to service the customer. I can't get trash off the street with an offer. I need a button seat or boots on the ground before I can start to service the customer. So we really want to look at time to fill. So with that, we needed to sit down and look at what our process was and where some of the bottlenecks in the hiring process existed. And through that, we were able to drive out quite a bit of waste, and we decided that our time to fill, so this is from rec approval to start date on the RPO side, is 40 days. We also needed to have quarterly business reviews to make sure that we are actually managing what we expect from the RPO. We had never met with them, we didn't really talk unless there was an issue, which is a very ineffective partnership. So now we've got weekly calls with the RPO, but we have these quarterly business reviews where they are expected to come to the table and talk to us about how they performed against the standards and what does the look forward look like. What are our goals in the following quarters? We have a certified to serve process as well. So any recruiter that joins our organization must go through a standardized waste management certified to serve. And so we don't want to make any assumptions that because they are experienced recruiters that they know the right way to do things. So we want to make sure that they understand what tools and resources are available to them and how to make the best use of those tools and resources. We want to make sure that they are compliant, that they're following the law. We are a federal contractor, so we've got a lot at risk if we're not doing things the right way. And so if a recruiter does not successfully complete certified to serve, they are not allowed to touch a requisition at Waste Management. And we take this very seriously. So if you have someone who is not successful in the certified to serve, it becomes a performance management issue and they are moved out of the organization. And we have a one-team philosophy. So a lot of what was happening in our RPO relationship was there was a lot of finger pointing because we didn't have an end-to-end agreement with the RPO. What the RPO was doing for us was sourcing, screening, and scheduling. And then there was a handoff to the recruiter. And so the recruiter, the in-house waste management recruiter, is the face to our business. So if there was something that wasn't happening with respect to movement on an open position, a hiring manager would call the waste management recruiter and say, hey, I haven't seen any candidates, or I'm not satisfied with the quality of candidates that I'm seeing, what's happening? And the recruiter would say, not me, it's the RPO. You know, you need to take it up with the RPO. And my philosophy is it's all talent acquisition. And so if you are the recruiter, the in-house recruiter, and candidate flow is not what it should be, or candidate quality is not what it could be, then you own it and you don't get to point the finger. And so we had to get everybody in the room on the same page and make clear that we are one talent acquisition team and there's no opportunity to point fingers. So that's on the RPO side. On the non-RPO side, which I mentioned is the lesser portion of our open positions, there was not as much tweaking that needed to take place, but there were still some adjustments that had to occur. We had a significant amount of third-party spend, and I can't even tell you what it was. I just knew that it was a lot. We had no way to track it. We had no way to control it. And my goal is not to completely eliminate third-party spend, but my goal was to significantly reduce it, particularly for where we were finding that we were spending money, which was on a lot of our kind of low-skilled, not real difficult to fill positions. I think that oftentimes recruiters just felt like, well, if I have an option to kick this to somebody else, I'm just going to kick it to somebody else. So they didn't try to work on those requisitions. And so we were spending quite a bit of money on that. So what we did was I built an internal sourcing team. And that team's sole responsibility is to research and pipeline proactive talent. And so that team has now been in place for a year. And after one full year of having an internal sourcing team, we realized a $2.6 million cost avoidance, because these were searches that would have ordinarily gone to third party. Our internal sourcing team was now filling those. And so people are now knocking down our doors saying, hey, I'd like to leverage the internal sourcing team to help me with a confidential hire. Or there have been instances where the internal sourcing team has gone to the business to say, I know that you don't have an open requisition for X role, but I really came across this great talent. I think that you need to meet with them, have an exploratory conversation. And what happens in many instances is that those individuals, they create a role for them and we bring them on board. So the internal sourcing team has been a tremendously successful venture on our part. We also needed to establish time to offer and time to fill metrics on the part of the exempt and administrative roles as well. So given the nature of our business, hiring for those roles is a bit more complex than it is on the frontline operations roles. And so our time to fill is a bit higher because we've got DOT, Department of Transportation, physicals, and other things that are factored into our hiring process. So our time to fill metric on this side of the house is about 53 days. And then we also needed to use historic trends to build a proactive talent acquisition strategy. And this was really on the RPO side and on the non-RPO side. Our business is incredibly cyclical, such that you could almost set your watch by what's going to happen in the business. So people naturally generate more trash in the summertime. So come April, every single year, our rec load peaks, and somewhere around September or October, our rec load declines. But when I was not a part of talent acquisition and was watching how they performed every year, I would see recruiters running up and down the hall. Oh my goodness, I've got all of these requisitions. What am I going to do? I would think the same thing that you did last year and the same thing that you're going to do next year, because it happens at the same time every single year, but inevitably we were always ill prepared for it. And so what we did was we created a forecasting calculator that took into consideration what our past 3-year trends were, and that helped us to be able to predict and forecast what we were going to need to start the process early enough so that we would have boots on the ground by the start of our hiring season. So now that we've made all of these changes, right, the question becomes, how do you manage it? So how do you ensure that what you put in place is working, and how do you hold folks accountable to those performance standards? Well, we've got a number of different diagnostic tools that we use to manage and drive performance. There are daily reports, there are weekly reports, there are monthly reports that we use. One of the key things that we look at are missing results, for example. This was a huge miss for us, where hiring managers would be interviewing numerous candidates, but they would never disposition them. And so it was a colossal waste of time, to say the least, on everybody's part, because I don't know why you're not selecting these candidates. And so I'm continuing to send you more candidates that are similar to the first ones I sent you. So we needed managers to give us feedback on why they weren't selecting these folks. When I first started looking at missing results, I think the first missing result report that I pulled showed that we had 10,000 requisitions that had never been dispositioned. Today, and I checked this morning, we have 7. We also needed to look at our open and fill activity on a regular basis. And so there's a recruiter dashboard that is published on a monthly basis. And what it does is it forces the talent acquisition leadership, as well as their respective teams, to look at how much movement is taking place on any given opening. And so we recognize that the talent acquisition process does not begin and end with talent acquisition. And I like to use the analogy of a machine, or a cog in a machine. And so if all the cogs are not moving together, then the machine doesn't work. And so what we found is, when we're finding that there's a bottleneck in the process, I'm proud to say that in most instances, it's not the talent acquisition team, it's the business. And so this gives us an opportunity to hone in on where those bottlenecks are, have an escalation process, and get managers to move the process along. And what I found has occurred is when we start escalating to hiring managers and then, if necessary, escalating to their managers, they're either getting on it, they're finding somebody else to take care of the interviewing in their absence, or they're closing out requisitions that have been open for a long period of time because they've recognized and acknowledged the fact that they probably don't need that talent any longer. So these are just a few of the diagnostic tools that we use to manage performance. And this, as you can imagine, caused quite a bit of voluntary and involuntary turnover within the talent team, because you started from a place where you had recruiters that it was just kind of a free-for-all. They came in, they worked as hard as they wanted to work, the performance wasn't measured, and now they're in an environment where they are held accountable. They're expected to perform to a certain standard, and their compensation and their bonus is a reflection of how hard, or maybe not as hard as they work. So it really has made a difference in terms of the quality and the caliber of talent that we have on the team. I don't expect you to read this. I just wanted to kind of give you a visual snapshot of some of the dashboards that we use to report out talent acquisition activity within the business. So this dashboard is what we use to communicate within the talent acquisition team. And essentially what this shows is a snapshot of open requisitions, hires that are left to be made, what the candidate pipeline looks like, how many positions are being filled by month, so that we can make sure that we are tracking how we need to track. And then this also gives us a year over year and a month over month comparison, so that we can see if we are improving in all of these different metrics. So again, this is what's communicated within the talent acquisition team. This dashboard here is what is communicated out to the business. And so this is just a high-level snapshot for our operations partners on open positions, and this is a real dashboard. So last week we had 1,795 open positions. And it gives you a breakdown of where those open positions exist. And also shows us for our two critical jobs, the majority of our hires are drivers and technicians. And so everyone always has their eye on what's happening in those particular job families. And so this dashboard shows you year over year how many people we're hiring in these job categories against how many people are actually leaving the organization in these job categories. And so we are hyper-focused not only in getting talent in the door, but we're equally as focused on retaining that talent. And the talent team is held accountable for that as well, which is something that they had not historically been held accountable for. So fast forward to today, this is what talent acquisition looks like in 2015. We have a multiple RPO model. So as I mentioned, our initial RPO relationship was over a decade long. They had the entire organization with the exception of our operations in indoor. And I felt, after talking to a number of different organizations, that if we decrease their footprint, that they would have an opportunity to be more impactful, and we found that to be true. And so we bifurcated the country, and we have one RPO that handles the southern part of the US, and then another RPO that handles the northern part of the US and Canada. And we have found that model to work quite well for us. We also have created growth opportunities within the talent team. So as I mentioned, initially it was a very flat organization, recruiter or director. Now we've got functional alignment. So instead of recruiters being aligned geographically, they are now aligned functionally. So if you're a recruiter, you're either a driver recruiter, a technician recruiter, a sales recruiter, etc. And so not only do you have opportunity to move up within the talent organization, you also have opportunity to sort of move laterally and get yourself involved in different functions. Looking at the trajectory within talent acquisition, you now have senior recruiters, you've got team leads, you also have managers as well as directors. And so I'm proud to say that we've been able to retain some really high performing recruiters by providing opportunities for them to advance within the talent acquisition function. We completely automated our process. We had gone through a number of different applicant tracking systems. The RPO that we were initially with had their own applicant tracking system that was really leaving a bad taste in our candidates' mouths. It just did not create for a very good candidate experience. So we decided to come back home to Taleo. And if you pay enough, you can get Taleo to do anything you want Taleo to do. And so our interview guides, which was a big challenge for us. You know, you're not legally required to have interview guides, but it's a great practice because if you ever have to defend a hiring decision, you want to be able to go back to that interview guide and say, this is why we selected this person for this role. And so now our interview guides are embedded in the applicant tracking system and attached to the requisition. It's one page. Once a hiring manager completes the interview, they go in, they put their notes. There's a drop-down box for them to disposition. So we make it as simple as possible. They click send, it goes back to the recruiter, it's done and it's housed electronically. And so we don't have to continue to incur costs storing things off site. We now have an electronic process there. Our candidates are able to schedule themselves, and so we've been able to avoid the back and forth of trying to reach a candidate, schedule a telephone interview with them. If they see a job and they're interested, they can call us, they can go online, they can schedule their interview, and then we would contact them to conduct that telephone interview. So we also have been able to, through all of this, reduce our overall time to fill by 30%, which has been significant. What's interesting now, though, is while the business complained about time to fill being an issue, now that we've reduced time to fill, they're saying, well, I don't know that time to fill is really that important. And so we've been spending a great deal of time explaining to them why time to fill is important, because it's really a demonstration of how effective we are in finding talent before our competition can find that talent, bringing them on board so that they are more quickly able to service their customer. And so when you explain it to them in that way, and then you tie some financial penalties to why, what happens if you don't have that talent on board, then it starts to crystallize for them and they begin to see and understand the value of time to fill. So those are just some of the things that we've done within our organization. There are numerous things that we've put in place to drive performance with the recruiters, to drive performance with the RPO, but they are too numerous to cover in a 30-minute period. So I'm happy to connect with any of you if you want to have conversation about what we're doing at Waste Management. And I'm also happy to share and glean best practices from you and hear about what many of you are doing within your own organizations. All right, thank you.